Explosive tensions erupted inside Buckingham Palace as Queen Camilla privately confronted Princess Anne in a locked-room standoff that stunned royal insiders. The Queen Consort, standing alone in the White Drawing Room, issued a bold threat: accept her authority, or be cut from royal tradition. Camilla's tone was cold, her words rehearsed, and her message unmistakable. Anne fired back with brutal precision, invoking Diana's legacy and stripping Camilla of emotional ground. The monarchy hasn't seen a clash like this in decades. The moment it happened, Camilla's final blow in the White Drawing Room. It was just after 3:15 p.m. when the door to the White Drawing Room at Buckingham Palace clicked shut. The moment it latched, a chapter opened that would leave lasting cracks across the royal household. Only two people stood in that room: Queen Camilla, stone still by the tall windows, and Princess Anne, framed in the reflection of centuries of royal portraits. No aides were present, no note-takers, no buffer of tradition or staff. Camilla didn't greet her sister-in-law. She didn't offer a seat, didn't meet her halfway. She stood at a distance, arms folded, posture stiffened by weeks of suppressed resentment. Her first words shattered the air. "I'll be direct. This ends today." Anne didn't respond. Her silence was not weakness. It was calculation. She'd known something was coming the moment she was summoned. But even she hadn't expected this level of formality. This wasn't a conversation. It was a warning. Camilla's voice was controlled, but the edge was unmistakable. She accused Anne, plainly, of treating her with contempt, of mocking her legitimacy, and of actively undermining her role as queen. She spoke not as Charles's wife, but as his chosen sovereign consort, and she made it clear she was no longer willing to tolerate being treated like an unwanted outsider. Then came the blow. Camilla said she was considering excluding Anne from Christmas at Sandringham, a move so unthinkable it nearly froze the room. No royal, let alone the Princess Royal, had ever been threatened with exclusion from the family's most sacred tradition. "If you cannot be civil to my children," Camilla said flatly, "you needn't come at all." It was a boundary drawn in steel. What made it more severe was the location. The White Drawing Room, long considered a ceremonial space of unity and diplomacy, was now the scene of a personal fracture. The insult wasn't the seating, it wasn't even the threat. It was the audacity. The suggestion that a woman who had been born royal, who had walked behind their mother's coffin, could be pushed aside by a woman who had married into it all late in life. Anne didn't flinch, not visibly, but her expression hardened, less wounded, more insulted. This wasn't the usual friction between sisters-in-law. This was two definitions of monarchy colliding, one built on blood and history, the other on love and legitimacy. And as Camilla stood her ground, Anne realized this wasn't about titles anymore. This was about Diana. And what came next would make that painfully clear. Anne was summoned, not invited. The Queen's silent power play. The confrontation began long before Anne arrived at Buckingham Palace. It started the moment her private line rang, a number almost no one used. On the other end was not an aide, not a secretary. It was Camilla herself. Her voice was clipped, rehearsed. "There's a matter that needs to be resolved. I'll expect you at the palace. Alone." There was no option to decline, no room for negotiation. The call bypassed protocol. It was a command, not a conversation. Anne made 2 discreet phone calls before leaving Gatcombe Park. One to Sir Timothy Lawrence, her husband. The second, to a long-trusted confidant in royal operations. Her message was short. If I don't return on time, assume I've been ambushed. The drive to London was silent. Anne did not dress up. She wore a standard royal day dress, navy, simple, unadorned. Her brooch, a modest silver thistle, chosen deliberately. No flash, just steel. Camilla had timed the meeting for exactly 2 p.m., an hour when most senior aides were on their afternoon rotations. It was a quiet hour at the palace, often reserved for reflection or internal briefings. That time slot sent a message. This was not a spectacle. It was control. When Anne arrived, she was not escorted in. A footman directed her straight to the white drawing room, then stepped away. The door was shut behind her. Inside, Camilla stood by the window, not turning as Anne entered. That, in royal code, was a calculated slight. Anne didn't bow. She didn't speak first. She stood, waiting. A wall against the storm. Camilla finally spoke without warmth. "Thank you for coming." Anne responded with a measured jab. "You summoned me. That's your prerogative, as queen." The pause before the word queen said more than any argument. Camilla heard the quotation marks. And it was then she realized Anne hadn't come to mend fences. She had come prepared for a line to be drawn. In that moment, the room transformed from a palace chamber into a battlefield, one decorated by portraits of queens past, none of whom had ever entered through marriage. And one of these women would walk out, changed. Camilla's cold opening. No pleasantries, only power. Camilla didn't offer a seat. She didn't ask about Zara or Peter or the grandchildren. She didn't even turn around when Princess Anne entered the room. Her back remained fixed to the tall windows of the white drawing room, eyes trained on the royal gardens as if they could shield her from the confrontation she herself had summoned. There were no teacups, no protocol, no warmth. Then, without turning, she spoke 4 words. Calm, controlled, cutting. "You've mocked me long enough." The sentence landed like a pin dropped in a mausoleum. Small, echoing, devastating. It wasn't spoken in anger, but in fatigue. The kind that builds over decades of being watched, judged, and quietly exiled by presence rather than policy. Anne, ever composed, folded her arms, not as defense, but as readiness. She didn't flinch. She didn't blink. She didn't respond. Camilla's voice, low and sharp, continued. "I have smiled through your silences. I've watched you speak volumes with nothing more than a glance. I've endured every skipped invitation, every whisper behind doors, every pause in conversation when I enter the room." The words came faster now, measured but full. "I was tolerated, never embraced, never by you, never by the family you claim to protect." At last, she turned. Her face was flushed. Her eyes bright. Not with sorrow, but with years of unspoken humiliation. "You don't think I belong here," Camilla said, "and I've known that since day one." Anne's reply was immediate, flat, and without drama. "You're not wrong." Silence again. But this time, it wasn't shared. Camilla exhaled hard, taking a small step closer. The floor beneath them had shifted. The room, adorned with oil portraits of women born royal, had become a battleground of legitimacy. Anne stood her ground. No apology, no explanation. She knew what Camilla was seeking. Validation, perhaps, or contrition, but she offered neither. Camilla finally said it plainly. "I may not be born into this, but I carry it now. Whether you accept it or not, I am queen, and I will not be diminished in my own household." Still, Anne gave nothing. No shouting, no finger-pointing, no thrown objects, just two women surrounded by gold trim, ivory silk, and centuries of buried resentment, unearthing truths long kept beneath royal rugs. Camilla had opened the door with fire. But what she would say next, what she would dare to threaten, would shake the very walls of the monarchy. And Anne's reply would become the line that no future queen could ever forget. The real humiliation: Camilla threatens to push Anne out. Camilla's next words weren't a warning. They were a declaration. "If you can't be civil to my children, then you needn't come at all. Not to Sandringham. Not to Christmas. Not anywhere we gather as a family." Anne blinked, not in fear, but in disbelief. No one had ever dared threaten her place at the royal table, not in 73 years. To suggest the Princess Royal could be excluded from the family's most sacred tradition, Sandringham Christmas, wasn't just protocol breaking. It was near sacrilege. Anne's voice stayed level. "You're telling me the Queen of England is now handing out family invitations like party favors?" Camilla's tone didn't shift. She stood by her words. "I'm telling you, the Queen is done being humiliated at her own dining table." It wasn't about gifts or greetings. It was about power. And Camilla was wielding it with stunning clarity. She invoked Charles's full support, referencing conversations already had about reshaping family gatherings to reflect modern unity, a phrase Anne immediately recognized as code for Camilla First realignment. What stung wasn't just the exclusion. It was the implication that Anne, born into the institution, shaped by it, loyal through its darkest storms, now stood at the edge of it, while Camilla, whose crown was won by time and tolerance, stood at its center. "You are redrawing the map," Anne said quietly, "and forgetting who built the kingdom." Camilla didn't flinch. She leaned in. "We both know this isn't about tradition. It's about dominance, and for the first time, you're not the strongest woman in the room." That was the true humiliation. Not the threat, not the exile, but the truth that Camilla believed herself entitled to redraw the royal family's power lines. And in that drawing, Anne had become an obstacle. But what Camilla didn't anticipate was that Anne had one name left to invoke, one name that still held weight no crown could bury. And it was about to be spoken. "Anne Fires, back. You will never be my queen." Anne stepped forward, not out of aggression, but out of resolve. Her voice was lower now, stripped of diplomacy. "You may wear the crown, Camilla, but you will never be my queen." The room went still. It wasn't the words. It was what lay beneath them. The unspoken allegiance to someone who came before. "You were the other woman, Camilla. You still are. History won't forget how you got here. It'll just stop talking about it out loud." Camilla's face shifted. Her lip trembled. Anne continued, "I watched you dismantle Diana's life in real time. I watched her walk into rooms you had already darkened. I watched my brother choose survival over decency." Each sentence landed with surgical coldness. "Your coronation was a performance. Your title is an inheritance of scandal. You may be queen by name, but you're queen of nothing sacred." Camilla tried to speak. Her voice cracked. "That's not fair." Anne didn't blink. "Fair? Diana didn't get fair. She got betrayal. And a tunnel in Paris." Camilla looked down, visibly shaken. For the first time, her authority wilted. Anne pressed on. "You're tolerated, Camilla, not celebrated. People bow because they must, not because they admire. There was no shouting, no raised voices, just a steady dismantling of every illusion Camilla had clung to about her place. Tears welled in Camilla's eyes. She turned away, but Anne didn't stop. This family still grieves what was lost, and you are the daily reminder of it. By now, Camilla was crying openly. The woman who had survived scandal, years of silence, and public scrutiny, was undone not by the press, but by the one royal who never needed a crown to be powerful. Anne didn't offer comfort. She didn't soften. She had carried this fire for decades, and she had finally spoken it into flame. Diana's legacy at the heart of the clash. The room was no longer about Camilla and Anne. It was now about the ghost that lived between them. Diana. Anne didn't need to say her full name again. Everything from this point on was echoed in her presence. She never got peace, Camilla, and you never stopped casting shadows. Camilla, now seated, trying to compose herself, whispered, "I didn't kill her." Anne replied instantly, "You didn't need to. The palace did that for you, but you made it easier." It was brutal, but to Anne, it was truth that had rotted in silence too long. You haunted her even when she wore the crown. You were at every dinner in silence, at every event in gossip. You were the unfinished sentence in every speech. Camilla sobbed, "She hated me." Anne's reply, "No, she pitied you." And then she said the words that would never be forgotten. Diana was supposed to be queen. You're just the woman who took her place, and convinced yourself the title made it real. The wound wasn't just personal, it was national. Anne voiced what millions had felt, but dared not say out loud. Camilla buried her face in her hands, but Anne, ever the soldier, kept her spine straight. There was no triumph in her voice, just fatigue. We will never heal as a family until we stop pretending that time makes betrayal respectable. And with that, Diana's shadow moved fully into the room. Not as vengeance, but as reckoning. Anne did not gloat. She did not console. She merely stood in the silence she had broken. And in that silence, Camilla wept, not just for what she had heard, but for what had always been true. Camilla's counterattack. You're no saint either. The room sat heavy with Anne's final words, charged, icy, and sharp enough to bruise bone. But Camilla, in tears, did not retreat entirely. Instead, she lifted her head slowly, wiped her face, and let something else rise. Anger. "You act as if you're the monarchy's conscience," Camilla began, voice shaking but gaining force. "But you're no saint, Anne. Don't pretend history forgets your affairs just because you rode a horse through them." Anne froze, but didn't interrupt. Camilla went on. "You think I ruined a marriage? You had your own scandals. You were still married to Mark when you started with Timothy. You think the world didn't see that?" It was a rare crack in Anne's famously guarded armor, a personal hit she hadn't expected Camilla to dare. "Why is your second marriage respectable, but mine is scandalous?" Camilla pressed. "Why is your silence seen as loyalty, but my survival is seen as shame?" The words came fast now, spilling from years of quiet humiliation. "I was hated for 30 years before I wore this crown. I endured it without public defense, without protection. I was hated for existing, for loving him, for waiting. And I'm still hated by you, for winning. Anne's face didn't change, but her silence deepened. Camilla leaned forward slightly, her voice steadier. You don't hate me because I hurt Diana. You hate me because I didn't bow to you. The accusation hung in the air, heavier than the portraits that lined the walls. Anne finally spoke, low and precise. I hate what you represent. That betrayal, given enough time, can wear a crown and be clapped for. Camilla stood now, fully composed. Then tell me this. How much longer will you guard a ghost while you destroy the living? Anne blinked slowly. As long as the living forget who they buried, to sit where they sit. This wasn't a clash between personalities anymore. It was a conflict of legacies. Diana's, Anne's, Camilla's. And in the middle, one man was about to be pulled into it all. The ultimate threat. Charles will choose me over you. Camilla's breath caught, and then her voice shifted, quieter, more dangerous. He chose me over Diana. You think he won't choose me over you? The words struck like thunder. Final, arrogant, certain. She stepped forward, her eyes now dry. You think you're untouchable because you're blood. But I'm his wife. And if I ask him to choose, he will. Anne didn't move. Her voice was ice. If you make Charles choose between his sister and his wife, you'll destroy this monarchy all over again. Camilla scoffed. The monarchy survived your mother's death. It survived Harry. It'll survive you. Anne turned slightly. It survived Diana too, but it hasn't recovered from her. Camilla walked toward the door, hand trembling on the handle. Then, maybe it's time we stop pretending that Diana's ghost still rules this family. Anne spoke once more, one sentence that froze the queen consort in place. The ghost doesn't rule, Camilla. It haunts. And it was true. The more Camilla tried to erase Diana, the louder she became. Inside that confrontation was a repeating cycle. A man torn, a family divided, a public still grieving what could have been. The confrontation was nearly over, but the damage had just begun. Charles's crisis, torn between sister and wife. Camilla didn't wait. She left the white drawing room in a near panic, makeup smudged, posture collapsed. She called Charles, immediately, emotionally, urgently. She hates me, Charles. She always has. She said, I'll never be queen. And you let her say it. Charles, reportedly at Clarence House, left without delay. He arrived at Buckingham Palace within the hour, disheveled, pale, and furious. Camilla met him behind closed doors. She begged, Defend me! Prove I matter as much as she does! Her voice broke. She made me feel like I was trash wearing a crown. Charles sat, visibly shaken. He didn't interrupt. Anne remained in the palace, waiting, composed. She didn't request an audience. She knew he'd come. When Charles entered the room, Anne didn't rise. She looked at him and said, simply, She threatened to have me removed. Charles exhaled slowly. She's overwhelmed. This wasn't how it was meant to go. Anne didn't soften. She wants you to choose. The silence between them stretched. Camilla waited down the hall, still sobbing. Charles turned toward the door, but didn't walk through. He said only this, You're my sister. You always will be. It wasn't a condemnation, but it wasn't comfort to Camilla either. That pause, that hesitation, was everything. And Camilla, waiting alone, understood it fully. The fallout. Three royal households on edge. Princess Anne left Buckingham Palace just after 6:40 p.m., her car unescorted, her expression unreadable. Inside, the walls still held the echoes of what had passed hours before. Truths thrown like daggers, tears spilled like ink, and a monarchy once again reshaped behind closed doors. Anne didn't speak to aides on her way out. She made no eye contact with the staff that bowed. Her silence was not anger. It was resolve. She had said what she came to say, and nothing else needed to be spoken. Back in her private quarters, Camilla collapsed, still in tears, surrounded by silence. She'd gone into the confrontation seeking control. What she emerged with was something closer to isolation. For the first time since becoming queen, Camilla realized that titles don't guarantee belonging. She wore the crown, but Anne had reminded her who history still whispers about. Charles, who had been pulled between the two women who define his public life, his sister and his wife, now faced a palace divided. He didn't speak publicly that evening, nor did he consult his press team. He reportedly remained in his study for hours, unreachable, his phone face down, his pen unmoving on a blank page. At Kensington Palace, Prince William was briefed. When informed of the confrontation, he gave no response. Aides say he simply nodded once, then left the room. The silence was telling. He didn't call his aunt. He didn't check on Camilla. The only action he took was canceling a family photo session scheduled for the following morning. Those close to him say it was not out of anger, but out of exhaustion. By midnight, emergency communications began across the three primary royal households: Buckingham, Kensington, and Clarence House. Press advisors were told not to issue statements. PR teams were instructed to stand down but stay ready. One insider remarked, "Everyone knows something happened, but no one is allowed to name it." The monarchy was bracing for impact, not from the public, but from within. The ghost of Diana, long mourned, rarely mentioned, had returned not in scandal, but in memory. And memory, unchallenged, can cut deeper than headlines ever could. Senior aides feared fractures that could no longer be mended by diplomacy. Others questioned whether Camilla's position could ever be emotionally reconciled with the firm, regardless of official titles. And perhaps most quietly, Anne's words had forced the institution to confront something it had long buried. The monarchy can survive many things, but not the permanent erosion of truth. That night, there were no public statements, no family photos, no waves from balconies, only cold hallways, hushed voices, and a silence that screamed one thing. The monarchy had been wounded again, this time from within. And as the crown continued to glitter on Camilla's head, it did so under the weight of everything that was never forgiven. Because in the end, it wasn't the tabloids, it wasn't Parliament, it wasn't scandal. It was Diana. Still, always, Diana. And a sister who finally said it aloud. When Princess Anne walked out of that room, Buckingham Palace wasn't the same. No statement was issued. No public explanation followed. But the tension pulsed through every corridor, from Clarence House to Kensington. Camilla had tried to assert her reign through silence and pressure. Anne shattered that silence with history, blood, and truth. Charles was left in emotional paralysis, his loyalty torn between the woman he crowned and the sister who never needed one. William said nothing, but his silence, too, spoke volumes. What unfolded wasn't just a personal clash. It was a symbolic one. A battle between legacy and legitimacy, between earned place and inherited power. And while Camilla may wear the crown, Anne reminded her who still carries the weight of real royal memory. Behind palace gates, the future of royal unity now trembles, not under scandal, but under the ghost of truth finally spoken aloud.